All right, we're on page 63, and we finished up, if everyone remembers, step 3. So we're going to be talking about step 4 and beyond today. With that, though, I want to get us started off right. So we'll stay on page 63. And Rob, if you will help me with the third step there.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks very much, Leo. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out this morning. My name is Rob Kay. I am a recovered alcoholic, and we're going to read the third step prayer, which is on page 63 of your big book. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Excellent. All right. Well, we were really right at the bottom of page 63. We've just read the third step prayer, so that's kind of a good review of where we were last week when we finished up. Let's go ahead and start at that. We found it very desirable, Rob, and then we'll just keep right on going there.
Okay. Page 63, everybody. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we express the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning, though, if honestly and humbly made. In effect, sometimes a very great one was felt at once.
Right. And I think just real quick, we've finished this up. We've taken this step. And now that we've done that, we've kind of finished the first 3 steps that we have within this. And so those are the foundation steps. And now we're about to step into the action steps, which begins with step 4. And if you remember, too, one of the things I wanted to kind of bring up is that when we start to talk about a step like where we're about to right here, we're not actually completing the step right at that moment. What we're doing is a lot of preparatory work for that step. And we're going to find that as we get towards the end of the discussion of a particular step is where we actually are at that point of doing that step. Now, one of the other caveats I have, we have a couple of folks that are big book study leads and do an actual program on the 4th step. I don't actually have that incorporated into my big book study as of yet. So I do want to say that we're going to talk about it in detail, but we won't really go into, say, the worksheets that we have available for everyone. And if you do want those worksheets, I can't remember, it's like 4 or 5 pages of the worksheets that we have are dedicated to the 4th step itself. I think that it's an excellent tool. It does a very, very good job of getting you not only started on your 4th step, but it keeps your focus in the right manner and way as you go through it. But it is something that I encourage you to get. At the same time, I encourage you to go through that with your sponsor. And then as a secondary part of that, if there are any questions whatsoever, either Rob or I or others that have been through those worksheets can actually help you work through those steps individually if you would like. So I do want to make that as an offer, as a sidebar, kind of as they might say offline. But I did want to just give you that caveat that I'll refer to the worksheets. I'll talk about it briefly as far as that's concerned, but the details that I'm going to be is just the elements of your 4th step. And I will leave it up to you to decide how you want to do your individual 4th step yourself. Okay.
Yeah, so many groups have their own worksheets and sponsors have their own worksheet. You know, I'm part of the Keystone Group. We have our worksheets that obviously we're working with. I've seen that when I did my 4th step a few years ago, I used the Joe and Charlie sheet. So, you know, work with your sponsor, you know, and go through it with them.
And I think the last thing I'll say as we jump into this The fourth step has been kind of characterized as this kind of painful kind of drudgery type of thing that you have to go through in order to get past everything. I can't begin to say enough that this should be actually something that you should be encouraged to go through, and that it is an exercise that is enlightening. It's very worthwhile, and I think that we haven't done a good enough job of making it a positive step, and one that, while you may have to do some soul searching and submitting of your own faults and everything, it's okay. This is a very private and very personal exercise that you go through. In fact, most people will only share it with one other person, and I encourage you to keep it to just one other person, because the intent is not to get this out to the world and make it public. The intent is for you to do some very private and personal soul searching, admitting some of your faults, your resentments, your fears, etc. And we'll talk more about that. But nonetheless, I think it should be an exercise that you look forward to, as opposed to resisting it.
Well, Leo, you know what? Anything that is, you already know these things. So it's not you, but it's the first time we've asked anybody to do any work. It's an action step. Action has to be done on the person's part. And as you say, too many times we go into meetings, everybody goes, oh, my fourth step. Oh my gosh, this stuff. You know what? It's an enlightening step. And Marcia, when, had a smile on her face, that, you know what? It's not something to fear. It's something that we look forward to. Let's get rid of all the garbage that is weighing us down. I always think of it as a knapsack on my back. I'm carrying all this crap around with me that has no purpose. It's not helping me. It's just slowing me down in life. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of all this stuff. I voice it out loud so that it's gone. It's not inside anymore. It is out. Liberating. So don't fear it. Embrace it. It's going to make you feel so much better. It's going to give you a life that you cannot believe. Did I say that strongly enough?
You did, and perfectly.
Okay, let's keep going. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. The first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom. So we had to get down to causes and conditions.
For sure. And so a couple of things here to note as far as this is concerned. It's like, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action, and I highlighted vigorous. And again, I underlined a couple of things here. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once, meaning right now, we follow it. It was followed by strenuous effort. And I think what we've got is why we think it's kind of this drudgery and something to not look forward to, is if you kind of take these words at face value, it sounds like this is going to be a lot of work. And really it's the work is really just trying to be honest with yourself. And that's the exercise they're trying to get to, is really this honesty and this openness to admit your faults and your shortcomings. So if you can get that and focus on that, then you're well on your way to doing your fourth step. And nobody says that it has to be X number of pages long. I think it needs to be thorough, it needs to be complete, and it needs to be accurate. It also needs to be succinct, okay? But at the same time, if it takes you 2 or 3 pages, great. If it takes you 7 or 10 pages, that's fine too. It's going to take a certain amount of work, and it's going to take a certain amount of volume as far as the amount of stuff that's going on, but it doesn't have to be a book. It really is this succinctness, and what you basically do, you don't have to write about each of the issues and problems that you've got. You just have to highlight them. Like this, I resent Rob for X, and leave it at that. It doesn't have to be, you know, I resent Rob for X and this is what happened. This is what we went through. This is how we're not talking. This is this, and this. You don't have to go through all of that. That's the part that you want to probably describe to that one other person you're going to share this with. But you know, when they talk about strenuous effort to face and be rid of, what they're basically saying is to be followed by accurate, complete, and thorough effort to face and be rid of, because it's so I think the word is enlightening, but it's I'm trying to think of the word. It's refreshing. It's kind of this load off of your back, as Rob had said. It's very, very cleansing, I think is a good word, you know. And then also that obviously had been blocking us. I underline this, our liquor was but a symptom. And that's very important to get across, at least, especially to a newcomer, but to everyone, to understand that the liquor is just a symptom when we're going through all of this, these steps and everything. It's just a symptom. And so we had to get down to causes and conditions. So that's kind of it, kind of getting started here. One of the things I do want to note is at the very bottom of 63 or very beginning of 64, all the way through page 88, I wrote this up at the top of my book. This is the working part of the Big Book program, is from basically the bottom of 63 through page 88. So we are now really at the purpose of step 4 is this strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. So that's really in the one sentence kind of statement there. That is the purpose of step 4. So, Rob?
I just want to highlight one other thing. Our decision, step 3, was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless it once followed by a strenuous effort. Therefore, steps 1, 2, and 3 can keep us sober for a short period of time, but it will have little permanent effect. We have to go into step 4 and move forward in our steps. I just want to highlight that. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damage to our unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values.
You know, and this is really just kind of setting things up. But remember here is that we're preparing for step 4. So we are at step 4. And in order to do step 4, we really have to understand it. And that's basically what he's doing here, is giving you kind of a business analogy as to what step 4 is kind of like. And certainly with inventory is exactly that. If you find damaged or unsaleable goods, whatever they may be, they're doing you no good sitting on your warehouse floor, taking up space where you could have actual saleable products sitting there instead. So if it is damaged and unsaleable, get rid of it, move on, take it as a write-off, and clear your slate of these products. The same thing's going to hold true with regard to the resentments that we're about to get into. Rob?
We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations.
Yeah, and a couple of just real quick. First of all, let's stop honestly. That is a big one. You've got to be entirely honest, and this is really with yourself. You're not fooling anybody else, okay? You're fooling yourself if you're not being honest. So that's a big one. And the second thing here is that we are making a reference back to that self thing, that self will run riot, that self, you're trying to fix self with self, and none of that worked. So in other words, we're basically ridding ourselves of that thought and that process. Rob?
Resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, where we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up.
Sure were. So resentment is the number one offender. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. It in and of itself destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Okay. And then from it, and Rob very deftly emphasized this, stem all forms of spiritual disease. All right. So it equals the resentment. And I wrote this down at the bottom of my book, excuse me. It equals resentment. All right. Not alcoholism. All right. That's an important fact. It's a piece of information here. A resentment is not your alcoholism. All right. So it equals the resentment, which equals a spiritual disease. And the spiritual disease is not a symptom. All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of get into some detail. It's not a symptom of the alcoholic themselves. All right. This is actually something that affects everyone. It's part of the human condition, if you will. We all have resentments, regardless of whether or not we drink or not drink. We're alcoholics or we're non-alcoholics. So just want to make sure that you're looking at this, that resentment is not your alcoholism and the spiritual disease of the alcoholic is not a symptom. Okay. And we are going to get more into some examples here as we go forward. I want to also say, your step 4 is not about the mechanics. It's about the experience you get from it. Okay. So just as a qualifier here, it's not about the actual exercise. You've got to go through that where you're writing stuff down, you're using people's names, you're identifying with the resentment, you're trying to figure out where it falls in each of the categories, whether it, what is the effects that it has on me, so you have to go through that. But the point being is it is the experience you get from it, and it is it should be a very good one. You should feel very relieved after you've done this. Rob?
Okay, Leo, I just want to throw in my little analogy that I was taught about the gutter with resentments. And the whole idea of the analogy is that water flows through the gutter and goes down the downspout. When there's no leaves or resentments in the downspout, the water flows freely, similar to God comes into our heart. The idea is that leaves collect in the gutter and they go down the downspout. They slow down the water going through the downspout until it gets to the point that the leaves block the downspout, so no water is getting through, and all the water is backing up in the eaves trough, causing damage, and the water is flowing over. Similar to resentments. Okay, what we have to do is we have to get rid of all the resentments, or we have to get rid of the leaves from the downspout in order for the water to flow freely again. What we have to do is we have to stick our hand down the downspout, start pulling out the leaves, pulling out the resentments that we have been collecting, so that God can come into our life, or a higher power, whichever you prefer. For me, it's God. Somebody else, it might be a higher power. And that's the idea about resentment. So we want to get rid of them. So get our hand down, get rid of them. Let's get rid of all these resentments that are blocking us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Remember, our resentment is something that we feel over and over again. Okay, until we mull it over in our brains until our role in the situation becomes smaller and smaller, and it's always somebody else's fault. Okay, so we transfer blame to another person. So I love the analogy was told to me, and it just made so much sense to me. Is that because in my mind I can see these resentments, that are blocking me off. I just got to stick my hand in there and start getting rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one at a time, and I hope it helps you. And if it doesn't, we'll move on. We'll get another analogy some other time.
Yep.
On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with?
So we're going to talk just a little bit about how to kind of identify with this. There are, like we said before, there are worksheets or there's non-worksheets and several ways you can do this. But the bottom line is that your resentments are at certain people. So that's kind of the number one thing. So one of the ideas here is to make sure that you are looking at all of the people in your life. And the neat thing about going through this exercise is that all of a sudden you're going to remember somebody that has what I call taking up space in your brain rent free. And you're blocked by whatever that might be. And so you write that person's name down. And I'll admit, one of the things I did were most of the people that were nearest and dearest to me in time and in relationship were my first names that went down, whether that be my mother, my father, my wife, my brothers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, those were easy ones to write down because they were, you know, right there at the tip of my tongue to be able to do that. But when you started getting into this, I remembered back to third grade, of all things, that I had this resentment that I had never processed and gotten through of a guy by the name of Todd Porter. And I won't go through the story, but I was amazed that that name popped into my head. And I was like, my gosh, I still resent this guy because of what he did to me. Okay. This was third grade. Now, it was an easy one to get through because obviously I had lost track of Todd. Obviously there's not an issue anymore or anything like that, nor even if I was to contact Todd to talk about the resentment, would he probably even remember himself. So it was an easy one, but I'm just giving you the example that what you're going to find is when you go through this exercise and when you're explaining it to somebody else, especially a newcomer, you'll be amazed at how many names actually do in fact come up. All right. And all of them are valid. Okay. So we are going to go through this. I'm going to have Rob kind of walk it through this next section here with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, and my wife. We'll kind of work through that process there. But one of the things I want to do, and that's one of the things we haven't done yet, and that's kind of to define what a resentment is. And I think I'll just break it down into the simplest of categories. One, it's your fears, okay? And by fears, and this has been given to me, I think it was Bill that actually explained this to me, but I'm going to share it with you guys, Bill from New Jersey that's in our meeting today. The fears are three of them. It's I'm going to lose something that I have. I'm going to not get something that I want, or you will find out what I did. These are the type of fears I'm talking about. One, I'm going to lose something that I have. I'm afraid because I'm not going to get something that I want. Or three, you're going to find out what I did. The second category are the harms. Okay. The things that I've done that harm other people, all right, regardless of what that is. It could be words, it could be actions, it could be inaction, etc. The third category is going to be conduct. What is my conduct and or other people's conduct that I have found a resentment for? So those are the three categories: fears, harms, and conduct. And I just define fears as I'm going to lose something that I have, not going to get something that I want, or you're going to find out what I did. And those are the things that you're going to be afraid of. All right, Rob, if you'll kind of walk through this next section where we were usually as definite as this example here.
Okay. Now, Leo, do you want me to go through all of these, or did you want me to stop at after we do Mr. Brown? Or just keep going right through?
Yeah, let's just go right through and then
Okay.
we'll briefly talk about them because you're gonna what I think you're gonna find is that there's some things that are there's some continuity between one person to the next, but there's also some areas here where there's differences because obviously I'm resentful at my wife, which is different than what I have for Mrs. Jones kind of thing. So yeah, let's just go through this section and that way we'll keep it kind of a little bit more efficient that way. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm resentful at the cause and it affects mine. So I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. The cause, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, and Brown may get my job at the office. It affects my sex relations, self-esteem, fear, sex relations, self-esteem, fear in brackets again, security, affects my self-esteem, brackets, fear again. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She stubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. It affects personal relationship, self-esteem, brackets, fear again. My employer, I'm resentful at. The cause, unreasonable, unjust. Affects my self-esteem, bracket, fear. Okay, the cause, overbearing, threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense. Affects my security. So I'm resentful at my wife. The cause, misunderstands and nags. Like Brown, likes Brown, wants house put in her name. Affects my pride, personal sex relations, security, bracket, fear.
Okay, couple of things here. So with Mr. Brown, there are several resentments there. Okay, first and foremost, his attention to my wife that affects my sex relations and my self-esteem. He told my wife of my mistress. Okay, now I have that to deal with. Well, that also affects my sex relations and also my self-esteem. And Brown may get my job and associated with my employer here. So there's a little bit of a tie in there, but it's separate. And that affects my security. And it also affects my self-esteem. So in all cases here, Mr. Brown is doing something. I have resentments, and the effect on that is going to be between my self-esteem or fear, sex relations, and my security. You know, everybody wants him to make sure that they can get up every day and not worry about their job, for example. Mrs. Jones is kind of separate here. She committed his best, my best friend, because he was drinking, and she can't keep her mouth shut, and she talks about us to a lot of different people. So that's going to actually affect my personal relationship. I don't have my best friend at my fingertips anymore, or my drinking buddy is not here. And it's affecting my self-esteem as well. So we kind of go through these, and you can see where there are going to be certain things that are going to be affected by where we're at. Look at the succinctness. Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife affects my sex relations and self-esteem. That's all you need to put down, because now I could take that and I could tell the story to the other person briefly as to why I'm putting that down and talk through it. All right. But you don't have to make it a book. You don't have to make it a big dissertation. And I'm just trying to tell you that a lot of people, and I've seen this, and I had to work myself, I'd get bogged down in the story, and the story isn't what's important. What's important is to recognize the resentment, what's causing it, and how it is affecting me. Okay. And that is what you want to try to get rid of. All right. And again, step 4 is not about the mechanics. It's about the experience you get from it. So if I can start to get these things down on paper, and I can start kind of putting my arms around them, I can start to deal with them even individually. And you're going to feel that you're going to see that there is a lot of kind of that freeing effect that happens, that flow of water through the pipes of your gutters, and getting those leaves out of the way. Rob?
Okay. I have a little note here saying the list is straight to the point. Keep it simple. Don't make it into something that it doesn't have to be. And we're on page 65, right at the bottom, Daphne. I just sent you a note, but we're right at the bottom. We went through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Again, honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us, and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived.
Yeah, I think the biggest and most important message here is that to conclude that others were wrong. It's easy for us to point fingers, and this is one of the pitfalls of going through this process is going to be that you're saying, I'm resentful of Mr. Brown because he did this to me. That's not what we're going after. We're actually going after, I'm resentful to Mr. Brown because this is an action that was taken, but this is how it affects me. And this is my resentment, not about what they're doing wrong. It's what I have a resentment for. So you remember here, this is about you and not about the other person in that regard. Because if we get into finger pointing, you're going down the wrong road. That's the wrong place to be. Yep, sure, you could have had somebody do something to you that was unprovoked, and certainly that could create a resentment. But again, it is about trying to identify what that resentment is and what it does to affect you. And then from that, you can start to get rid of it. Rob?
Yeah, some people say that the examples here that are used are from Bill's own list, but I think they're just examples. So we'll leave that up to other people to decide. It is plain that life, which includes deep resentment, leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. When harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, drink is to die.
Absolutely. And this paragraph is really the crux of what we're talking about. And really, these are the places that you're going to see the most progress in these deep resentments. And again, these are the things that are taking up space in your heads rent free. It is the hating of someone or something, and it's the things that keep you up at night. All right. So think about that part of it. I had a friend of mine that we were close in high school. We kind of went our separate ways. It turns out both of us went down the path of aviation, him being civil aviation and mine being military aviation, but we came back together later in life. And we struck up a good friendship and kind of rekindled that relationship that we had. But there was some things that were wrong, some things that just didn't equate together. And what would happen is that we were opposed philosophically and politically in a lot of arenas. All right. And I tried my best to not even approach those as discussions. He did not, and that's okay. All right. But what was happening is that I was starting to have these resentments towards him because he would lash out at me because something else was happening politically that he didn't agree with. And because I didn't 100% agree with him, well, and I was a target. And I finally pushed back at one point in our discussion. Ultimately, we stopped talking. And what I did then was, for months, this guy occupied space in my head rent free, and it just bugged me, in part because I really liked the guy. I was very close to him, but he was adamant about his position, and we couldn't get past that. And it wasn't until I went through this process a few times. And there are some exercises out there that people ask you to do. And I think that there are some that are kind of effective, but I won't necessarily go through those because those aren't necessarily being brought up in the book itself. But there are ways that you can pray for a particular person for a period of time over and over and over again. And after a certain period of time, all of a sudden you find yourself being enlightened and free of those ill feelings and those resentments towards that person. And again, like I said, there's several ways of doing that, but it was an exercise I had to go through. I at first it was awkward. I wasn't used to doing it, but and I'll be honest, I prayed a couple of times a day for more than 2 weeks. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but I do remember at one point I finally started to get past and over. I started to feel good, and I started to then not be so resentful of him, accept him for who he is. Now, in all honesty, part of what I had to do for myself was to stay away from him. So what I'm saying here is he was affecting my self-esteem. To some extent, he was affecting my security, and it was affecting my conduct. Okay. And I was lashing out back at him, and it was unfair to both of us. So in order to get through it, I did go through this process of writing him down, what it was, the actions that were causing the resentments, and then how it was affecting me, both through my self-esteem and my security were the big ones. Okay, with that, we'll keep going. And I will say that this is a must coming up here with what Rob is about to read.
If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison.
Absolutely. And real quick, I'll just say that this is a must. Okay, so that's how I've written it down. I've highlighted this one sentence here, or two sentences, I'm sorry. And it is imperative that you understand that this is something that you have to do in order to survive successfully. Rob?
Well, the line just before in the other paragraph, the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. We turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol.
Absolutely. Here, we turn back to the list. It held the key to the future. All right. So now that we understand what our resentments are and that we are focused on us and our issues and challenges and problems with other people, and we realize that we are the owners of those resentments. We now understand what the resentments are, and we are looking at the list, and we begin to go through the process and understanding how these people really dominated us, how they had taken up that space in our mind. And in that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill, meaning that if we couldn't get past these things, it was going to create stress and anxiety and anger. And those are not good things for people that want to survive for very long. All right. We saw that these resentments must be mastered. You have to get over them. And the only way to do it is to go through this process, and you must master them. And I could not just wish them away. Like you've got to really go after this. And this is where they talk about a strenuous exercise. You've really got to get into this and really work it hard. Rob? And
they're also going to show us in the next paragraph to master resentments so we don't have them build up again. How do we now deal with any resentments that we're going to come up with today? This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us. They, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done.
Yeah, and just real quick, this is known as the step 4 prayer. It's a very simple prayer, and it's one for yourself. This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? And the idea here is that, we look at people and we see that there's problems that they have. And I'll go back to my high school friend. He was very, very resentful of a lot of things, and he let it be known. And so in essence, he was also a sick person spiritually, just like I was. All right. And I don't like their symptoms, the things that they're doing and everything. But at the same time, I had to get through it, so that I had to be able to show some tolerance and pity and patience. And I haven't been able to get, this is a long process for this particular person, and I'm still working on that part of it, as far as reaching out to him and actually doing my amends in the manner in which I feel like that might be acceptable to him. At this point, I think we're still in the position where there's still potential for harm to be done, either to myself or others, with regard to the strength of his convictions. But when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And this is kind of a process that I went through with this high school friend of mine. And again, that's a prayer for yourself to get through. Rob?
We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one.
Yeah, it's real quick. That's just it. The idea here is that if you're retaliating and or arguing with someone, you are not getting anywhere to where we want you to be, where this book wants you to be, and this program is prescribing. So if we do, we are going to destroy our chance of being helpful. And honestly, whether they accept your help or not is not the end state. The idea is that you are being helpful. And if you can be helpful, then you're doing what you need to be doing. If they accept it, great. If they don't, well, that's okay too. Rob?
Okay. I love the fact that it says here, we can't be helpful to all people. Sometimes we have to walk away. Okay, we pray to God. We ask him what we can do. How can we be tolerant, patient with people? But you know what? Sometimes it just doesn't work, and we have to walk away. And it says right here, we can't be helpful to everybody. Because we always think, well, God wants us to, be kind to everybody. Yes, we want to be kind, but we can't help everybody. Some people have mental issues, they have other issues that we just can't help them with. Okay, I pray for myself so that I can help others in our thinking. Okay, I made a deal with God to be helpful to all people where I can, but we avoid retaliation or argument. I dig my heels in, and no matter what good point Leo comes up with, I've dug my heels in, and I'm not going to change my point of view. I just can't. I am so locked in. Okay, that no matter what Leo says, no matter what brilliant argument Leo has, for me to change my mind, it doesn't do any good. So we just walk away and we say, I'm getting heated about this right now. Let's revisit it. And then we come back and talk about it at another time. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight.
Yep. So big thing out of this paragraph is where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Where had we been? We looked for our own mistakes, not the other person's. And this is where everybody gets tripped up a little bit going through this process, because they all of a sudden start to point their finger at somebody else and says, well, it's their fault because they did, because they said, because whatever. All right. That's you're going down the wrong path. Stop for a second. Maybe do the third step prayer, refocus, and come back at it as to what was my role in that particular situation, and where was it that I'd been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And that's really what you want to get out of this paragraph here, is that it's about you, not about the other person. Rob?
Great point there, Leo. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees. That's why it's important sometimes to speak with your sponsor. And because we are so deep in it that we can't see where we went wrong. It's all the other person's fault, because in our minds, we built it up. And the more we think about the resentment, the smaller our part became, and it was all the other person's fault. So we speak to our sponsor. They can help us sort out where it is my fault. What did I do? How did I step on other people's toes and start the ball rolling, for the resentment to build? Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble.
It does. And there's a big thing about fear. We're going to actually go through this in this next couple of paragraphs here. But that is one of the important things that I want to get across. And again, I want to review the fears that we're talking about, that there's going to be something you're going to lose that you have. You're not going to get something that you want, or somebody's going to find out what you did. So that's the kind of fear we're talking about. So, Rob?
We've reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse.
Absolutely. And really kind of that we're digging into this, all right? The fears may have not had any resentments connected to them, but they're still important to get out there. And it was because of the self-reliance had failed us. Basically, what Bill is trying to say here is that you're not going to be able to do this on your own. And these fears that you have, you're going to have to reach out and really tap into this higher power of yours in order to be able to get through them. And because all they do is, when somebody's afraid, it's either that fight or flight type of mentality, and both of those are survival techniques or tactics and stuff. And so you can kind of see where that's going to cause you to become cocky or worse. Rob?
Perhaps there's a better way. We think so. We're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity.
Right. The big thing here is that we are now on a different basis, okay? The basis of trusting and relying upon God or your higher power. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves, and we are in the world to play the role He assigned. So really what you're basically doing is transferring this reliance on yourself over to your higher power and asking for the guidance that you're going to be getting in that regard after you've tapped into this inner strength and this higher power. Rob?
Yeah, and here I've got a note saying, instead of running on what I think I should do, now I ask God, what should I do in this situation? Remember, I don't know the answers anymore. Okay, I tried to rely on myself and it failed me each time. Now I'm trusting God. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear.
Yeah, this is such an important message to get. Never apologize to anyone for depending on God or your higher power. I mean, this is strength, not weakness. We can laugh at those who think spiritually the way of weakness. No way, we're just not, okay? This is anything that you do to make yourself stronger in that regard is a good thing. It's the way, the verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. And I can't emphasize that enough. If I have the faith that I can do something because I have relying on a higher power and this inner strength that I've been able to tap into, imagine the confidence that you now have that you didn't have before. And we've talked about that with regard to having that inner strength and power to overcome this inability to stop drinking. And it's a big one. So never apologize for God or your higher power. Instead, you ask him to let him demonstrate through you what he can do. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. Once you've done this kind of uplifting kind of feeling, this freeing that happens because of it, never, ever apologize for that. If you're overcoming your fears, you're becoming a better person, and being a better person shouldn't be an apology. All right, we're going to stop right there today. We're going to jump into, we're still on step 4. All right, we're not finished with it yet. We'll still be working on that this next week, but I thought I'd ask Bill to enter in and give us some of his insight.
Hi, this is Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, Leo and Rob. You did a good job here. This is a tough chapter to get through because there's really a lot of information here. And basically what Bill Wilson's trying to tell us here is we're supposed to get to this as quickly as we can. He gave us a couple of time limits here. He said next or at once. That means we're supposed to do it right now. You know, we're not supposed to put this off. The quicker we do it, the easier it's going to be to get through it. Because the longer you wait to do this, the more stuff you're going to remember and the more resentments that are going to build up and all of that kind of stuff. And you're going to wind up with more and more and more to write. So the quicker you get this done, the easier it's going to be. And it's really not as hard as most people make it out. For some reason, a lot of people try to avoid this step. And it's really, really not that hard. Once you get into it, it's a lot easier than it looks like. And like was mentioned, they have these worksheets. They're all over the internet. You can find dozens of different ones. Whichever ones you use, it doesn't matter. And if you don't want to use them, you don't have to use them. I've run into some people that sponsor people, and they won't use the worksheets. They want to just use a blank piece of paper. Well, however you do it, the important thing is to do it. And he gives us a diagram here on how to do it. And it basically is just showing us, you know, what I'm resentful at, the cause, what it affects. And then it's a real good idea to go through this with a sponsor, somebody that's been through it before, because it's real easy to get all of this stuff mixed up. And if you're going to, and also not just use a sponsor, but pray and ask for help before you do it. Because if you try to do this all by yourself, you might get through it or you might mess it up. And it's a lot easier if you do it with somebody that has some kind of experience at it. Even all the professional athletes in the world, the people that are the best at what they do, they all have coaches because they know that 2 heads are better than 1. It works better when you're doing something and somebody else is advising you on how to do it who's already done it themselves. It just works better that way. And then on page 67, he gives us this here resentment prayer or 4th step prayer. That's one of the great things that's in this book. And then notice it says, God save me from being angry. This is telling me I got the right to pray for myself. I'm asking that I don't get angry. We're supposed to pray for the other person also, yes, but we can also pray for ourselves. This is like a whole new ball game for us. You know, we don't just have to pray for the other person. We can pray for them, and we can also pray for ourselves. So you got two prayers to say when you're going through this resentment stuff. You pray for the person you have a resentment against, and you pray for yourself not to get angry. And then he's got in the text here, he's got the instructions for column 4. And he didn't put a diagram on it, but he put it down here in the written part. And it says, putting out of minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. A lot of people call it my part. Nowhere in here does it say to look for my part. It says for me to look for my mistakes. If I'm looking for my part, I'm not following the instructions. I have not put out of mind the wrongs others have done, because I think they have a part and I have a part. It doesn't work that way. When I have a resentment, the resentment is 100% mine. It's my reaction to what somebody else did. They have no part of that resentment at all. The resentment comes from me. It came from inside of me. It belongs to me. I own it 100%. Even if I didn't do anything wrong to anybody and they did something to me and I have a resentment against them, the wrong that I'm doing, the mistake that I have, is I have a resentment. When we're not supposed to hate other people. You don't have to like everybody. And some people you have to love from a distance, but you're not supposed to hate people, because when we hate people, it makes us miserable. Okay? So basically, he's giving us the instructions here for the last column, and this is what we're supposed to go through, and this is what helps us get rid of it. And then he talked about fear, and fear. He even had some of the fears bracketed in the resentment inventory. So fear pops up all over the place. A lot of the resentments are based on fear, or they're based on selfishness. These are different things that happen to us. And this is stuff that bothers us and can drive us crazy and make us go back out and drink. This is why we inventory this, so we can get rid of it. It told us at the beginning, before we got into this, that we have to look at the things in ourselves that was blocking us. We have to get down to causes and conditions. That's what we're trying to get rid of. That's what's blocking us, our resentments and our fears and our harms to others. Those are the things that are blocking us off from our higher power. And that's what we're trying to get rid of with these things, so that our higher power can get into our head and help us. That's all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thanks, Bill.
Appreciate it much, Bill. All right, let's go ahead and close things down with the Serenity Prayer, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
A serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can,